What is up, guys? Had a request to do the iPhone X versus the LG G7. So these are two older flagships that have aged actually pretty well. So let's go ahead and get into it. So hardware wise, the iPhone is definitely a lot smaller than the G7 here. They're both glass and metal phones, and they both feel pretty great in the hand. You get a nice premium feeling with both of these phones. They're both IP rated, which is nice, so you can get them wet. And the iPhone will cost you around 400 to 500 bucks in the used market. You can't get this new from Apple, I believe. The G7 you can get for around $200 to $300 new. So very good phones. As you can see, the G7 significantly cheaper than the iPhone. So let's go ahead and get into it. The displays on both of these phones. So you have a 6.1 inch IPS display on the G7. Absolutely love this display. It's a 1440p display, 564 for the PPI. I'm a huge fan when it comes to just extremely sharp resolution displays. This is just awesome. If you like watching 1440p content, you can definitely tell the difference between the iPhone's 1080p display. Now the iPhone does have an OLED display, which I think gives off way better colors than this IPS display and deeper blacks, which is something I really like about this display. It is 458 for the PPI, so not as sharp as the G7 display, but it is a pretty nice display. But they both have the notch, but the iPhone has the just huge notch where it houses the Face ID for unlocking your device, and on the G7 it has a notch, but it's not as big as the iPhones. And definitely if you're not into the notch, you're gonna hate the iPhone. But if it doesn't bother you, then you can go with both of these phones and it won't really bother you. But just know the G7s is just a little bit smaller here. Alright, so what's awesome about both of these older flagships is that you're running the latest version of their software. So Android 10 on the G7, iOS 13.5 on the iPhone X. Now I do believe the iPhone will continue to get updates 3 to 4 years maybe from now. I believe this might be the last update for the G7. You might not get Android 11, but I don't completely know that for sure, just a guess. But yeah, so I know for a fact the iPhone is pretty much guaranteed to get those updates. So if that's important to you, then you know which one to go with. So Snapdragon 845 on the G7, Adreno 630 on the G7 as well for the GPU. And on the iPhone you have the Apple 11 chip, and both of these phones are really great at gaming. You got 4 gigs of RAM on the G7, and you have 3 gigs of RAM on the iPhone, 64 gigs on both of these guys for the base storage. But you do not have external storage, so you have no micro SD support on the iPhone as opposed to the G7. You can max that out at 1 terabyte, which is really great. Performance on here is great. You can play games on high, Fortnite, Call of Duty, whatever. You can play games on high on both of these phones, which is awesome. So as far as speed and navigating through the OS and stuff like that, both of these phones are extremely fast. The gestures work fast on Android 10 as well. So just very fast phones. It really just comes down to what operating system that you like. If you want something that's more customization and you're into a lot of Google stuff, then obviously Android is going to be it for you. If you're just really sold on FaceTime and iMessage and stuff like that, and the apps that they have on the App Store, then obviously you're going to go with the iPhone. But you really have to narrow it down to which phone operating system that you like. Now let's talk about the cameras on here. So on the G7 you have a 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You can shoot in 4K 30 or 60 FPS. The selfie camera is an 8 megapixel camera that shoots in 1080p. On the iPhone you have a 12 megapixel wide and a 12 megapixel telephoto lens that will help with those portrait photos. It shoots in 4K 24, 30 or 60 FPS. Front facing camera is a 7 megapixel, shoots in 1080p. So as far as the cameras go, it's kind of back and forth, but I would go with the iPhone X's camera. So as you can see in this photo, just way more detail with the doorknob as opposed to the G7, and it got the color right. It actually looks a little washed out. But if you look at this Funko Pop right here, you can see the G7 did a way better job. The iPhone just struggled with these harsh lights and kind of washed out the photo. The G7 just more lifelike, more colorful. And as you can see outside, I would still go with the iPhone. There's just more detail, color accuracy is right. So overall I think the iPhone X cameras age definitely a bit better here. So as far as cameras go, they're both great cameras, but if you want the better camera out of both, obviously you would go with the iPhone here. So as far as speakers, so get this, guys, this is crazy. So you have stereo speakers on the iPhone, and you have one boombox speaker on the G7, and I'll actually go ahead and let you hear it. But the G7 speakers are so much, it's louder than the iPhone's stereo speakers, which is crazy. So the boombox speaker is still one extremely loud speaker. So I'll go ahead and let you hear it actually. Alright, so as far as audio experience, definitely going with the G7. In addition to that, you have the quad DAC, and you have no headphone jack on the iPhone, of course. So if you're a serious music person, the G7 is the way to go. You still have your headphone jack with the quad DAC, really great equalization settings as well. So music people go with the G7 hands down. So as far as getting into the device, you have Face ID on the iPhone, which works really great. It rarely messes up and stuff like that, so I rarely have an issue with Face ID. With the G7, you do have more options. You have the face unlock. It's not as secure as Face ID, of course, but you also have the fingerprint scanner, which is very secure as well. So you do have more options, for the unlocking process on the G7. So let's go ahead and talk about battery life here. So battery life on the G7, you have a 3000 milliamp battery, 18 watts, wireless charging as well. I did battery drain test, go check that out. 6 hours and 30 minutes is what you would get if you're doing just a lot of stuff on your phone. If you're a light user, maybe 7 hours of screen on time. For the iPhone, you have a very small battery, 2716 milliamps, wireless charging as well. This phone actually gets you around 6 hours of battery life, from what I'm seeing. So battery life is pretty much the same on these two. They seem like they die around the same times. The G7 just might be a little bit better here, but yeah, so as far as battery life, both pretty decent. They'll get you through a day, not particularly great. So both phones have aged very well. Like I said, it really comes down to the cameras, the software and stuff like that, and overall, like, are you into audio experience and stuff like that. So you really have to make those decisions. So be sure to let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.